It starts like any other Tuesday morning in Chicago, the kind of ordinary day nobody remembers a week later, until this one refuses to be forgotten. Streetlights hum awake before dawn, coffee makers click on in 1,000 kitchens, and the city hums with the quiet electric rhythm nobody ever thinks about. Maria Delgado, a 38-year-old ICU nurse, is finishing her overnight shift when the hallway lights flicker once, twice, then die completely. For a moment, everyone assumes it's a local outage, the kind that happens during a storm and fixes itself in 20 minutes. But the backup generators kick in almost instantly, a sound the hospital staff know well, a low mechanical groan that means something bigger has gone wrong. Outside, across the city, traffic lights go dark all at once, turning every major intersection into a slow, tense standoff between confused drivers. Maria's phone buzzes with a message from her sister in Ohio, then another from a cousin in Michigan, both asking the same question: is your power out too? Within the hour, news alerts confirm what officials feared. A cascading failure has knocked out large sections of the national power grid, stretching from the Midwest to the East Coast. Utility companies scramble to identify the cause, testing whether it was a cyber attack, an equipment failure, or a surge triggered by extreme demand. For most people, the first day feels like an inconvenience, not a crisis, the kind of story you tell at dinner once the lights come back on. Maria drives home exhausted, only to find her apartment building eerily quiet, elevators frozen, refrigerators silently beginning their slow countdown toward spoilage. She checks her phone battery, already down to 60%, and realizes she has no idea how long it needs to last. Gas stations across the city post handwritten signs on their pumps because the electric systems that pump fuel from underground tanks require power to function. Drivers who assumed they could simply refuel discover long lines forming at the few stations, still running on backup generators. Grocery stores keep their doors open using flashlights and battery-powered registers, but shoppers move quickly, aware that frozen food will not last much longer. By evening, Maria's neighbor knocks on her door holding a battery-powered radio, the only reliable source of updates now that television and internet access have become unpredictable. Officials urge calm, reminding residents that emergency services remain operational and that repair crews are being deployed as quickly as possible. Still, an unfamiliar silence settles over the city that night, without streetlights, without the glow of televisions and windows, without the electric hum most people never notice until it disappears. Maria lies awake thinking about her patients back at the hospital, wondering how long the generators can hold before fuel supplies run low. The next morning brings the first real signs of strain, as hospitals across several states report rationing backup power to prioritize life support equipment. Patients on dialysis machines and home oxygen concentrators become an urgent concern, since many rely on electricity that no longer reaches their homes. Emergency crews begin identifying vulnerable residents, especially the elderly and medically dependent, moving some to shelters equipped with generators. Maria volunteers for an extra shift, knowing the hospital needs every available hand as patient numbers rise from heat exposure and medical complications. Meanwhile, cell towers begin losing their own backup batteries, causing spotty service in neighborhoods that had cellular access just hours earlier. Text messages that once sent instantly now take minutes to deliver, and phone calls drop without warning, cutting people off mid-sentence. Families separated by the outage struggle to confirm each other's safety, relying on landlines, in-person visits, or handwritten notes left on doors. Local radio stations become a lifeline, broadcasting updates, safety tips, and messages from residents trying to reach loved ones across the city. Small businesses that depend on electronic payment systems are forced to close or operate cash only, and many discover their registers can't even open without power. Restaurants throw away spoiled inventory, while others fire up charcoal grills outside just to serve something warm to hungry customers. By the third day, water pressure begins dropping in several neighborhoods, since many treatment and pumping stations require consistent electricity to function properly. City officials issue a precautionary boil water advisory, warning residents to treat tap water before drinking it, just in case contamination becomes an issue. Long lines form outside stores selling bottled water, batteries, flashlights, and portable chargers, with some shelves emptying within hours of restocking. Maria's building manager sets up a community water station in the lobby, filled using a generator-powered pump borrowed from a nearby fire station. Neighbors who rarely spoke before begin checking on one another, sharing supplies, and organizing informal watch groups to keep an eye on empty apartments. A quiet sense of community grows even as frustration mounts, people leaning on each other in ways the daily rush of normal life rarely allows. Not everyone responds with patience, however, as isolated reports emerge of price gouging on essentials like ice, batteries, and bottled water. Local authorities respond quickly, reminding vendors that price gouging during a declared emergency carries serious legal consequences. Meanwhile, engineers working around the clock identify the root cause, a combination of an unexpected equipment failure and a cascading overload triggered by rerouted power during peak demand. Repair crews begin methodically restoring transmission lines, prioritizing hospitals, water treatment facilities, and emergency response centers first. Maria hears cautious optimism on the radio that some suburbs might see power restored within 48 hours, though the timeline remains uncertain. On the fourth day, the psychological toll becomes more visible as sleep-deprived residents struggle with the constant uncertainty of not knowing when normal life will resume. Rumors spread quickly without reliable internet access to fact-check them, some claiming the outage will last a month, others insisting it's already fixed in half the city. Community centers and churches open their doors as makeshift cooling stations, offering shelter to residents overwhelmed by summer heat without air conditioning. Maria spends her one day off helping distribute supplies at a local shelter, watching neighbors share what little they have with strangers who need it more. An elderly man on her street, dependent on a motorized wheelchair, is relocated temporarily to a shelter with backup power after his battery runs dangerously low. Despite the hardship, small moments of kindness multiply. Children playing board games by candlelight, families cooking meals together outdoors, neighbors trading batteries for canned food. Local news still broadcasting from a generator-powered studio highlights stories of communities banding together, offering a counterbalance to the frustration and fear spreading elsewhere. By the fifth day, several neighborhoods finally see their power flicker back on, cheers erupting from apartment windows as refrigerators hum back to life. Maria's building remains dark for now, but she can see lit windows a few blocks away, a small but powerful sign that restoration is truly underway. Grocery stores and restored areas reopen fully, though shelves take time to restock as delivery trucks catch up on days of delayed shipments. Traffic slowly returns to a manageable rhythm as more intersections regain working signals, easing the standoffs that defined the outage's early days. Hospitals report a collective sigh of relief as backup fuel supplies are replenished and full capacity power returns to critical care units. Still, officials caution that full restoration across the entire affected region will take a few more days, as crews methodically work through the most complex repairs. On the sixth day, Maria's apartment finally flickers back to life, the refrigerator groaning as it restarts, the hallway lights blinking on one by one. She stands in her kitchen for a moment, staring at something as simple as a working light switch, feeling a strange mixture of relief and disbelief. Across the city, similar scenes repeat themselves, families cheering as television screens flicker on, children clapping as ceiling fans begin spinning again. Not every neighborhood is so fortunate yet, and officials remind residents that rural and lower-income areas sometimes experience longer restoration times due to older infrastructure. Advocacy groups begin raising concerns about the disparity, pushing for updated grid investment to ensure vulnerable communities aren't left waiting longest during future emergencies. Meanwhile, economists begin calculating the financial toll of the outage, estimating billions of dollars in losses from spoiled inventory, halted production, and disrupted business operations. Small business owners describe the emotional exhaustion of watching a week's worth of revenue disappear, some uncertain whether they can recover the losses at all. Insurance companies begin fielding an unusual surge of claims, ranging from spoiled restaurant inventory to damaged medical equipment reliant on constant power. On the seventh day, officials finally announce that the entire regional grid has been restored to full capacity, ending what analysts call one of the most disruptive outages in recent history. Maria returns to a normal shift at the hospital, grateful to see monitors humming steadily without the anxious hum of backup generators beneath every hallway. She notices small changes in herself, an instinct to keep a flashlight by her bed, a habit of charging her phone the moment it dips below 80%. Across the city, hardware stores report a surge in sales of portable generators, battery banks, and emergency preparedness kits as residents rethink their sense of security. City council members announce plans to review the grid's vulnerabilities, promising updated infrastructure investment to prevent a similar cascading failure in the future. Engineers explain that modern power grids, while remarkably efficient, remain vulnerable to cascading failures when demand spikes collide with unexpected equipment issues. Experts note that the outage revealed something many people rarely consider, that electricity isn't just a convenience, but the invisible backbone connecting nearly every part of daily life. Hospitals depend on it, water treatment depends on it, communication depends on it, and even the simple act of buying groceries depends on it more than most realize. Maria thinks back to the neighbors who checked on each other, the strangers who shared batteries and bottled water, the quiet resilience that emerged when the systems people rely on suddenly disappeared. She realizes the crisis was never truly about the power grid itself, but about how deeply modern life is woven into infrastructure most people never see or think about. A single failure, hundreds of miles from her home, was enough to ripple outward and reshape an entire week of ordinary life for millions of people. Officials remind the public that events like this, while rare, are not impossible, and that basic preparedness can make an enormous difference when the unexpected happens. Simple steps, they explain, like keeping a charged power bank, a battery-powered radio, a small supply of water, and a flashlight within reach, can transform a stressful outage into a manageable inconvenience. Community organizations begin hosting preparedness workshops, teaching residents how to build emergency kits and create communication plans for future disruptions. Maria attends one of these workshops on her next day off, surprising herself by how much she didn't know about basic emergency readiness before the outage. She learns about backup charging methods, safe food storage during power loss, and the importance of having a battery-powered or hand-crank radio at home. The instructor reminds the group that resilience isn't about predicting every possible crisis, but about being ready enough that any single disruption doesn't spiral into chaos. Weeks later, life in Chicago returns fully to normal. Streetlights glowing at dusk, refrigerators humming quietly, traffic flowing smoothly through every intersection. Yet something subtle has shifted in how people think about the system supporting their daily routines, a quiet awareness that wasn't there before the outage. Maria keeps a small emergency bag by her front door now, filled with a flashlight, a portable charger, bottled water, and a few days of non-perishable food. She still remembers the sound of hospital generators kicking in that first morning, a reminder of how quickly ordinary life can change when the invisible systems people depend on go silent. Looking back, she understands that the crisis was never really about darkness or inconvenience, but about resilience, community, and the value of being prepared for uncertainty. In a world built on invisible infrastructure, the outage revealed a simple truth, that convenience is easy to take for granted until the moment it disappears. And when that moment comes, it is rarely the systems themselves that carry a community through the crisis, but the people who show up for each other when everything else goes dark. The grid eventually recovered, the economy stabilized, and daily routines resumed their familiar rhythm. But the lessons from that week lingered far longer than the outage itself. Families started keeping emergency supplies stocked, neighborhoods organized informal check-in systems, and communities began advocating for stronger, more resilient infrastructure investment. Maria often thinks about how quickly modern convenience can vanish and how quickly people can adapt, cooperate, and rediscover resilience when circumstances demand it. The week without power taught an entire city something textbooks rarely capture, that beneath every convenience lies a fragile system, and beneath every crisis lies an opportunity to rebuild stronger. It also taught a quieter lesson, one Maria carries with her during every shift since, that preparation isn't about fear, but about giving yourself and your community the ability to face uncertainty with steadiness instead of panic. As the city moved forward, engineers worked on hardening vulnerable transmission points, utility companies invested in redundant systems, and emergency planners updated protocols based on what the outage revealed. Public officials held town halls to address community concerns, promising increased transparency around infrastructure vulnerabilities and faster emergency response coordination for future incidents. Local schools incorporated basic emergency preparedness lessons into their curriculum, teaching children simple steps to stay safe and calm during unexpected disruptions. Grocery chains reevaluated their backup power capabilities, recognizing how quickly spoiled inventory and closed doors could affect entire communities during extended outages. Hospitals across the region reviewed their emergency fuel contracts, ensuring backup generators could sustain critical operations for longer periods if a similar event occurred again. Telecommunications companies examined the vulnerabilities exposed when cell towers lost backup power, prompting investment in longer-lasting battery systems and expanded emergency communication networks. For Maria, the most lasting change wasn't found in policy meetings or infrastructure upgrades, but in the quiet resilience she witnessed on her own street during the darkest days of the outage. She remembers strangers becoming friends over shared batteries, exhausted neighbors laughing together by candlelight, and an elderly man's gratitude when someone simply checked to see if he was okay. Those moments, she realized, revealed something the outage couldn't take away: the enduring instinct of people to care for one another when the systems around them falter. Months later, when a minor storm knocked out power in her neighborhood for just a few hours, Maria noticed her own reaction had changed completely. Instead of panic, she felt calm, reaching for her emergency bag, checking on her elderly neighbor and reassuring her sister with a quick, confident text before her phone battery even dipped. The brief outage passed without incident, but it reminded her how much resilience had quietly become part of her everyday mindset since that long week in the dark. Across the country, similar stories echoed in communities that had lived through the outage, a shared understanding that preparedness wasn't paranoia, but simple, practical wisdom. Emergency preparedness sales remained elevated for months afterward, as families continued investing in flashlights, portable power stations, and basic supply kits for their homes. Local governments used the momentum to push forward long-delayed infrastructure funding, framing grid resilience as both a safety issue and an economic necessity for the future. Engineers explained that no power grid can ever be made completely immune to failure, but redundancy, modernization, and smart grid technology can dramatically reduce both the likelihood and severity of future outages. Public trust in the system slowly rebuilt itself, aided by transparent updates from utility companies and visible investment in stronger, more resilient infrastructure. Maria's hospital added additional backup generators and expanded its fuel storage capacity, ensuring critical care operations could withstand an even longer disruption if necessary. Neighborhood associations formalized the informal support networks that emerged during the outage, creating structured plans to check on vulnerable residents during future emergencies. Reflecting on the entire experience, Maria often tells new coworkers the same thing she learned that week, that the strength of a community isn't tested during ordinary days, but during the ones nobody expects. The outage, she says, stripped away convenience for 7 days, but it revealed something far more valuable underneath, the quiet, steady resilience of people willing to help each other through uncertainty. And while she hopes never to experience a crisis like that again, she knows that if it happens, she, her neighbors, and her city will be far better prepared to face it together. In the end, the story of that week wasn't really about a failed power grid at all, but about how quickly modern life reveals its hidden dependencies, and how quickly people rediscover their capacity for resilience when those dependencies disappear. It was a reminder that infrastructure, no matter how advanced, remains only as strong as the redundancy built into it, and that communities, no matter how disconnected daily life makes them feel, remain only as strong as the people willing to show up for one another. 7 days without power changed how an entire city thought about convenience, preparedness, and connection, proving that even in darkness, people find ways to create light for each other. Chicago wasn't the only city forced to adapt that week, as the cascading failures stretched across parts of Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, and even reached into pockets of the Northeast. In Detroit, auto plants that depend on precise, uninterrupted electricity were forced to halt production entirely, furloughing thousands of workers for the duration of the outage. Factory managers described the strange experience of watching an assembly line built for constant motion sit completely still, machines silent for the first time in years. In smaller manufacturing towns, the ripple effects reached suppliers hundreds of miles away, as parts shipments were delayed and contracts pushed back by weeks. Economists later noted that even a short disruption to manufacturing can ripple through supply chains far beyond the region directly affected by the outage. In rural Indiana, farmers faced a different kind of challenge, as irrigation systems and automated feeding equipment on large farms lost power at a critical point in the growing season. Some farmers scrambled to find diesel-powered backup pumps, while others watched anxiously as crops went without irrigation for days longer than they could safely tolerate. Livestock farmers worried about ventilation systems in barns, especially during the summer heat, prompting emergency deliveries of portable generators from neighboring counties. Meanwhile, in New York, financial markets faced unusual disruptions as several data centers supporting trading systems switched to backup power, causing brief but noticeable delays in transaction processing. Analysts spent the week reassuring investors that core financial infrastructure remained secure, even as minor glitches highlighted just how much modern markets depend on constant electricity. Airports across the affected region faced significant disruptions as well, with flight delays and cancellations stacking up due to power issues affecting control systems and ground operations. Thousands of travelers found themselves stranded in terminals, lit only by emergency lighting, waiting for updates that came slowly through battery-powered announcement systems. Airlines worked to reroute flights through unaffected hubs, but the ripple effect on schedules lasted for days, even after power began returning to the region. Back in Chicago, Maria's hospital wasn't alone in its struggle, as nearby medical centers reported similar challenges, managing patients dependent on powered medical equipment. Nursing homes across the city faced some of the most difficult conditions, with staff working extended shifts to manually monitor residents whose usual electronic systems had gone silent. Some facilities relocated their most vulnerable residents to emergency shelters, while others relied on portable generators donated by local businesses, eager to help however they could. A nearby fire department opened its doors overnight to residents needing a place to charge medical devices, turning its garage into an impromptu charging station lit by portable lanterns. Volunteers organized supply drives across the city, collecting batteries, bottled water, and non-perishable food for families struggling the most during the outage. Local radio hosts dedicated entire broadcasts to connecting people who needed help with those offering it, turning the airwaves into an informal support network for the community. A group of teenagers in Maria's neighborhood spent their afternoons checking on elderly residents, carrying water up staircases in buildings where elevators no longer worked. Their efforts, initially just a way to pass the time without phones or internet, grew into an organized effort recognized later by the City Council for Community Service. Local businesses that managed to stay open often did so creatively, one bakery using a wood-fired oven to keep baking bread throughout the outage, giving the neighborhood a small taste of normalcy. A hardware store owner extended credit to regular customers who couldn't pay electronically, trusting they would settle their accounts once card systems came back online. These small acts of trust and generosity became some of the most repeated stories once the outage ended, spreading through word of mouth long after the lights returned. Journalists covering the crisis noted a familiar pattern seen in past disasters, that infrastructure failures often reveal both the fragility of modern systems and the strength of human cooperation. Sociologists studying the event later pointed out that communities with stronger existing social ties recovered emotionally from the disruption more quickly than those where neighbors barely knew each other beforehand. This observation prompted several city planning departments to explore ways of strengthening neighborhood connections as part of broader emergency preparedness strategies going forward. Meanwhile, federal energy regulators launched a formal investigation into the cause of the cascading failure, promising a full public report within several months. Preliminary findings pointed to an aging transformer station that failed under unexpectedly high demand, triggering a chain reaction across interconnected transmission lines before automatic safety systems could fully contain it. Utility executives faced tough questions from lawmakers about why critical infrastructure hadn't been upgraded sooner, despite years of warnings from engineers about aging equipment. In response, several states announced accelerated timelines for grid modernization projects, including investments in smart grid technology designed to detect and isolate failures before they cascade. Renewable energy advocates pointed to the outage as further evidence for diversifying power sources, arguing that distributed solar and battery storage could reduce vulnerability to single points of failure. Utility companies, for their part, emphasized that no energy system, traditional or renewable, is entirely immune to failure, and that redundancy matters more than any single technology. Back at the hospital, Maria's supervisor organized a debrief session once the crisis passed, allowing staff to share what worked well and what needs to improve before the next emergency. Nurses described the exhaustion of working extended shifts under emergency lighting, while administrators discussed logistical lessons about fuel storage and staff scheduling during extended outages. The hospital used the debrief to update its emergency response plan, incorporating feedback directly from the staff who lived through the week firsthand. Similar debriefs took place across schools, businesses, and government offices throughout the region, each organization documenting lessons that would shape their preparedness for years to come. Insurance companies, meanwhile, worked through an unprecedented volume of claims, adjusting future policies to better account for extended power-related disruptions. Some businesses discovered gaps in their coverage they hadn't previously considered, prompting a broader industry conversation about business interruption insurance in an increasingly grid-dependent economy. For ordinary residents like Maria, the financial toll was smaller but still real. Spoiled groceries, missed shifts, and the unexpected cost of emergency supplies adding up over the week. Community organizations stepped in to help families facing the greatest financial strain, distributing gift cards and grocery vouchers funded by local donations. As weeks turned into months, Chicago slowly absorbed the lessons of that difficult week, weaving them into policy, infrastructure, and everyday habits. City officials unveiled a public awareness campaign encouraging households to build basic emergency kits, distributing checklists at libraries, community centers, and grocery stores. Utility companies began sending customers seasonal preparedness reminders, a small but meaningful shift toward treating resilience as an ongoing responsibility rather than an afterthought. Maria noticed the shift most clearly in casual conversations, neighbors mentioning their backup batteries, the way they once mentioned weather forecasts, a quiet normalization of preparedness in daily life. She often thinks about how strange it is that something as invisible as electricity could teach an entire city so much about visibility, connection, and care for one another. The outage never became a headline people forgot easily, but over time, it transformed from a crisis into a shared reference point, a story neighbors told each other to explain why they now keep flashlights by the door. Looking back on the entire week, from the first flickering hospital lights to the final restored street lamp, Maria understands it wasn't really a story about a broken grid at all. It was a story about a city discovering, almost by accident, how much strength it already had, waiting quietly beneath the surface of ordinary routines, ready to rise the moment it was truly needed. Historians who later studied the outage compared it to other moments when a single point of failure exposed just how tightly modern life is stitched together by systems most people never see. They pointed to past blackouts, past network failures, and past supply chain disruptions, each one offering the same quiet lesson that convenience is built on fragile, interconnected foundations. What made this outage different, they argued, wasn't its cause but its scale, a reminder that a single aging transformer could ripple outward and touch millions of unrelated lives within hours. Students in economics and engineering programs began studying the event as a case study, analyzing what worked, what failed, and what could be done differently next time. Some researchers focused on the technical failures, examining how automatic safety systems could be improved to isolate problems before they spread across an entire regional grid. Others focused on the human response, studying how communities organized themselves, shared resources, and supported vulnerable neighbors during the 7 days without reliable power. Their findings consistently pointed to the same conclusion: that technical resilience and social resilience matter equally, and that neither one alone is enough to weather a major disruption. Maria sometimes speaks to nursing students about that week, not to frighten them, but to remind them that calm, practical thinking matters just as much during a crisis as technical skill. She tells them about the moment the hospital lights flickered, the sound of generators kicking in, and the quiet realization that the next 7 days would test everyone in ways textbooks rarely describe. She tells them, too, about the neighbors who shared batteries, the teenagers who carried water up dark stairwells, and the bakery that kept baking bread by firelight to give people something warm. These stories, she says, matter just as much as the technical lessons, because they reveal what actually carries a community through uncertainty when the systems people rely on suddenly disappear. Every year, around the anniversary of the outage, local news stations revisit the story, interviewing residents about what they remember most and what, if anything, has truly changed since then. Most people mention the same things: the eerie silence of a city without streetlights, the unexpected kindness of strangers, and the small, stubborn instinct to keep going even when nothing felt certain. Utility officials use the anniversary coverage as an opportunity to update the public on infrastructure improvements, a yearly reminder that resilience is an ongoing project rather than a finished achievement. Some improvements are highly visible: new substations, modernized transmission lines, and upgraded monitoring systems designed to catch failures long before they cascade into something larger. Other improvements are quieter, but just as important. Updated communication protocols between hospitals, utilities, and emergency services designed to coordinate faster if something similar happens again. Community groups continue hosting preparedness workshops each spring, a tradition that started almost by accident in the weeks following the outage and has since become a fixture of neighborhood life. Attendance grows every year, not out of fear, but out of a shared understanding that a little preparation costs almost nothing compared to the peace of mind it provides. Maria still keeps her emergency bag by the door, though these days it feels less like a reaction to fear and more like an ordinary part of responsible daily life. She has added a few things over the years: a printed list of emergency contacts, a small first aid kit, and a deck of cards, a reminder from that long week that connection matters just as much as supplies. When new residents move into her building, longtime neighbors often mention the outage within the first few conversations, not as a scare tactic, but as a quiet welcome into a community that knows how to look out for each other. It has become, in its own strange way, part of the neighborhood's identity, a shared memory that turned a difficult week into a lasting sense of belonging. Looking back, Maria doesn't think of that week as the story of a broken power grid at all, but as the story of a city that discovered, almost by accident, exactly how much it could rely on itself. And perhaps that is the quiet truth beneath every story like this one, that the systems people build can fail, but the people who build them rarely do, especially when they choose to face uncertainty together.